Okay, we're gonna get started. I'm your moderator for the day. My name is Joseph Benton. My first speaker will be Buck Holsinger from Broadway, Virginia, owner operation of Home Place Farms with his wife and 4 children. He is a 10th generation farm that produce grass-fed beef. He will and does love talking about anything related to farming, Silvopastures, rotation grazing, and grass-fed beef are flying. He is a vet. Thanks for your service. Here I give you Holsinger.
Good afternoon. My name is Buck Holsinger. Unfortunately, my wife wasn't able to be here. She's the better half of our operation and certainly much prettier. But I know it's always toughest to be the first guy to talk right after lunch, but I'm going to do my darndest to keep you all awake. So my day job, I'm a C-17 pilot in the Air National Guard full-time. That's my baby. That's my mistress, as my wife says. That's normally what I'm looking at day by day. I believe that picture was taken over Afghanistan about a year ago. But let me tell you about my passion. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit today. As he said, I'm a talker, and I sometimes don't always stay focused on topic. So Virginia Tech recently asked if they could come out and do a video about my operation and the Silvopasture I've implemented. And so I figure it's easier for me to take a nice videographer's cut of what I do to give you the basics of my farm, and it also cuts about 5 minutes off the talking you have to hear from me directly, although it's only me talking in the video. So let's see how this goes. My name is Buck Holsinger here on Holsinger Home Place Farms. I'm blessed that my grandfather worked very hard to ensure this generational farm made it to my generation. And so my wife and I kind of feel that our job on the farm is to make sure that it's available for our kids and specifically our grandkids. Probably the main focus of our farm is to build a sustainable operation, and that really includes multifacets. We've got grass-fed beef. We also have worked hard to incorporate the kids in the farm. You know, my son really enjoys hogs, and so we've done pasture pork. My daughters, they raise eggs and chickens and have started on a sheep project, and so we're trying to build an environment that will support a multifaceted agriculture. Probably back 2010 when we moved into rotational grazing, we subdivided the 72 acres. And quickly I realized that the shade and windbreak loss from not having the edges of the property where it was continuously grazed made it very difficult on my animals in the summer. So did a little bit of research and got reading about this 2-story agriculture. And so the Silvopasture has really become an important part of us making a better beef product, as well as facilitating other species being able to be brought onto the farm. A lot of the research that I did was talking about species I'd try, how do I make this profitable, as well as how to implement without losing a whole lot of property. That's why if you look at my property, it still has a bunch of large open areas. We still can run a bush hog through. We put 12 to 15% on hold while we're waiting on the trees to grow. Once I found the concept, it was absolutely a group effort. You know, reaching out to my partners in NRCS, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia Forestry. I was very lucky that working with NRCS, I was able to qualify for grants as a beginning and veteran farmer. Nobody in Virginia had gone from grazing pasture, implementing silvopasture. If we were to walk around this field, you'll find rows that are 2 rows, some are 3, some are edges, some are single species, some are multiple species. We tried a lot of different things because it was something new in Virginia. We're standing in a field that was planted in 2013. Most of the rows were set in 8x8 spacing with pines as trainer trees, and their entire job is to grow straight and tall and force my hardwoods into a straight, hopefully marketable timber product. What we love about the Silvopasture is that we are creating the shade, we're creating that windbreak, and then we also are inviting insects, which cause birds, which cause ground species. So it really becomes this idea of a total package to create a sustainable farm. It's going to take time, it's going to take effort, but I think doing the time and effort in the planning is probably the most important. I came into it blind, that it was just shade. I wanted shade, but ultimately it's all part of building a micro ecosystem. You know, my farm, my 72 acres here, is completely different because of the trees that we put on the property.
And I'm going to make sure that Priya gets her thank you, because she did an incredible job making our efforts look as good as she did. So while that's a much dated picture, the young man standing beside me is now 18 years old, and I realized as I was putting this together, I don't have a family farm picture of all of us, and I felt that it was only fair. It's a group effort on our farm, taking what was once a 72-acre continuously grazed cow-calf operation that I farmed with my grandfather and my uncle back in the 80s and 90s. And then we put in multiple BMPs, specifically the rotational grazing with hardened waters, etc. on the property. Oh. Our biggest goal for my wife and I is we want to keep the farm viable for our children and grandchildren to make a decision if that's something they want to do. My grandfather did that for us in our generation, and as such, they're engaged in all parts of the operation. And each are taking an opportunity to try different things that they enjoy. And that's a true joy for us as parents and of a farm that was bought back in 1773. Like I said, I'm sure that I could have several 30-minute talks about some of the things I do on the farm, but we have the rotational grazing showing before and afters. We've done annuals and utilize those to help us with our grass-fed beef operation. But today, in my shortened time, I'm here to talk about Silvopasture. And so, in my naivety, I wanted Silvopasture for shade and windbreak. That was my initial plan. Ultimately, I found that there was an option for secondary feed sources or incomes, but I also, while I only have 72 total acres and about 10 of it, as you can see on the far east side of that property, is a stream, riparian buffer that's in CREP as well as EQIP. So I lost about 10 acres into that initially, but I wanted the design also to easily integrate with our rotational grazing. Found a book. How many people believe that the new things are really old things just coming back for a second, third, or fifth time? And ultimately, this book by J. Russell Smith that I was only able to find used for $7 became the basis for a lot of the things that I'm trying on the farm. And you know, I have a lot of time to read. It's about 7 hours from the East Coast to Europe in a C-17. And the autopilot does all the real work. All I do is sit there and look good. But I read the book, and then I realized it's something I was going to try. And I reached out to my partners. Several are here this weekend, and they helped me to make it a reality. Back then, the resources weren't readily available to help somebody design this. So this is me at a kitchen table. And I'm going to use field 3 just to, that's the one I'm going to talk about. But right now, out of the 52 grazing acres, I've got 48 of it in Silvopasture, or in the implementation phases of Silvopasture. And so a crayon and some maps that NRCS gave me helped me develop the one on the left to the one on the right. Each of these went back through those resources that I had, both in my local Virginia Tech and then also JB down in Farmville. This is another one of our fields, and ultimately, as I was the first person to be looking for a cost share, like any good farmer, at least starting out, I was looking for cost share, and I had to do a little negotiation because our standard wasn't written in Virginia yet. And taking from forest down to pasture, you can absolutely keep about 300 trees an acre. What I quickly did with my crayons and my quick calculator was that if I did 300 trees per acre, I'd put about 40% to 50% of my land locked away until I grew trees. So with a little negotiation, we got down to 100 trees an acre. But we also used it as a learning experience because it was one of the first in Virginia. So we've got 2 and 3 row sets. We've got multiple species, all trying to figure out what might work on my farm and to give ideas for future research or other farmers. Here's design 2. So it was done in 2 phases. We did 2 pastures initially, and 3 years later we did another. So I got a little bit better. I went back to my old engineering drawing days and almost did it to scale. And these were planning maps that ultimately I handed to a contractor. Site prep the first time. We knew that we wanted to avoid some competition of the trees with the heavy, dense fescue base that we had. So we used what's called a tree scalper. That's taking about the top 2 inches of soil and rolling it over to create rows that were then planted in. This is what the trees look like planted. The standard does require me to use tree tubes or and mats. And then I use little yellow circles because those are pine trees that don't require those type of mitigation efforts. And so I went out with that tree scalper and a good eye thumb and made somewhat straight rows. Second time we came around, we had learned some lessons that we'll talk about in a minute. And so I have a 40-inch tiller, and so I lightly tilled the area to make the rows so that my contractor knew exactly where to plant. And then used spot herbicide as my species to limit the weed and grass species around the trees during implementation phases. So short-term maintenance, we utilize a single-strand electric fence to protect the trees from cattle. My cattle are all trained. I sometimes come home from a trip after 7 days and find the power's been off the entire time. And knock on wood, except for the creep grazing of calves, which is not a bad thing at all, it does. And then I'm here taking bird nets off the top. I don't know if the bird nets protected it from the birds, but it's certainly a little bit of labor and love. And then long term, we've got to prune with the plan to selectively harvest, trying to make income sources as the trees grow. But all the while, it was for the rotational grazing to we'll utilize rotational grazing to prevent compaction once the cattle are beside. Maintenance is now turned into a family affair. I don't have number 4. Number 4 is 7 years old, and she has her own fold-out silky saw that's only about this long. And it's funny, she'll run down the road getting every limb she can, and then her brother, sister, and mom and I come along with the other implements we have, trying to force these trees into what might be a marketable product down the road, since there isn't quite the growth structure that you would have in a forest to get marketable timber. So I'm pretty proud of this. You can see the crayon drawing that was given, And then ultimately, this was a field day that we did a couple months ago. And Becky was nice enough to come out with her drone and show that, hey, it actually does look like it does. And if you go onto Google Maps, you can certainly see it. I can tell you every time I fly back into Martinsburg, I can find my farm in a heartbeat because I'm the only guy with a checkerboard pasture. Ultimately, my outcomes, my cattle still love grass. The electric fence was successful, keeping animals out. And by my calculations, I lost 14% of my grazing during establishment. Establishment length is different depending on the species. In our first implementation, we did a lot of black walnuts. I was sitting here going, you know what? I'm about 35, 40 years from retirement, my hope. And I was like, pass this on. I'll harvest the black walnuts. The kids can decide if they want to plant trees back. I make my money and I hand the farm off and watch, from my rocker on the porch. However, what we're finding is that those trees take 8 or 9 years of protection before I can let the cattle get near them. They just grow too slow. And so luckily we didn't just do black walnuts, so we did black locust as well. And you're going to find that on my farm in Virginia, black locust is absolutely the shining star if you need it quick for an initial implementation. Like I said, black locusts love our site. These trees here were 6 months old. And I still have some pecan trees that at 3 years haven't even done this. You're gonna see that not only does it grow fast, but with fescue here in Virginia, we fight a lot of summer slumps in our cattle production. And this is actually a volunteer black locust grove that was put, that has 6 or 8 parent trees from when I was a kid. And I would quickly see that before we brought the cattle in, it looked like that. And, the next day I'd go to move them and they've stripped every leaf off those. If you look in almost any forage book, it's going to tell you that black locusts are poisonous to cattle. I venture to say I don't think I've lost a cow from it yet. So here's the close-up example. So we just moved them in. I immediately went up, took a picture. If you can see, the cattle are already in there. They didn't even go do the walkabout to see what was on the ground. They saw the tree and went direct. 2 hours later, they had taken everything they could off those volunteer trees. I don't know how many people here are hunters, but ultimately I found this technique off of hinge cutting that they utilize to create deer habitat. And this is one of my kids' favorite things to do because they get to do what they call parachute trees. So you cut the tree halfway and then you start climbing up the tree and you pull the tree over. And if you notice, the tree still has half of its cambium. And this was done, I think this picture was taken in March of this year. Still has cambium so that the tree is still living. It was a cold tree anyway. And knowing that the cattle enjoyed it, I was like, you know what, I'm going to try hinge cutting and see what we get. So what do? I get sprouts, and I get even more grazing for my cattle on what would have been a cold tree. That's what it looked like before. And then they come through and they will trim those things down quite well. Oh, there it is. I knew I had the picture. I mean, they take almost every leaf they can off the bottom. Hinge cut only lives a year or two, but once again, it was a throwaway tree for me, so it was a win-win. But talk about the two-story agriculture. J. Russell Smith talks about that we can use these trees as a secondary feed source. On the top left, you've got a persimmon tree. That persimmon tree is only 7 years old and is already fruiting for me. It's been great for my hunting, which was a tertiary effect of this, certainly not in the standard, but I think now we can say that wildlife and livestock can work together. And then you've got honey locust pods that if I had a true sheep herd, and Dr. Fike tells me that when those pods come down, the sugar content, the sheep would just love them and devour them as part of the forbs that they were eating. And these are just some pictures. I'm going to go through them, and I tried to give enough pictures, but I've only got 3 minutes to my number that I said, because ultimately I'm sure there are questions. I mean, I'm humbled by how many people are here. I was very hopeful when I only had 3 at 10 minutes till, but I I know there's one that I'm looking for. So these are black locusts. These actually, yeah, so those are 4-year-old black locust trees. This winter we'll actually take the temporary fence down. They have not been pruned properly. We realized we're a little late in pruning, so we've started pruning earlier, especially on black locusts. We saw when we were pruning, we immediately get strong growth the next year up. And so this year we're going to start pruning more heavily. We used to try and keep half the canopy, but especially on black locusts, we're going to try and push them a little bit harder to try and get a better center for what likely will be firewood, fence posts, etc. down the road. This picture's in here specifically. Whole field was planted at the same time. This is a row, black locusts, and that's a row of pecans. Now I will say during that implementation between water or planting methodology or personnel, my pines did not survive. And it probably was competition with the grass as well as the use of oust. We tried spraying before, and then we also tried spraying later because they were having so much trouble trying to release them, and they probably were already impacted from that competition, and I don't have pines. But as you can see, I mean, the locust didn't care. I used the white picture just to show you what it's supposed to look like. This is a set of Dunstan chestnuts. If you know what Dunstan chestnuts are, it's an American chestnut hybrid, a named variety. It made my implementation a lot costlier, but once again, I was looking for that tertiary effect. I want to hunt. And so that is a model of what it should look like. Those pine trees going up to force my center trees to race for the sun as well. And then on the right is a pre-pruning picture of that same row earlier in the fall. The lessons never cease. One of the biggest fighters that I have is a little bit of thistles. I can grow thistles like no other. Now, I will say at first I thought that was a bad thing. You can see in the bottom right I mowed beside them trying to protect the trees, but ultimately if you look at thistles versus when the trees need to grow, the thistles actually protect the trees when they are somewhat dormant in the summer because your deer, etc. won't go in, just looking for spotty things. My next steps, this is a picture of my crep when we put it in. I said I had that 10 acres. I put it in a 15-year crep contract with water buffers of 35 and 100 feet. Took away 10, almost 5, a fifth of my acreage. This is a further picture of that down in the bottom right, and you can see those oaks have had an opportunity to grow. Those were planted in 2011, so they're about 10 years old. I've got 5 more years on my contract, and my thought is that will certainly be part of my Silvopasture implementation. My cattle won't go back into the stream, but I will bring those buffers back down with my rotational grazing to continue. But it all starts and ends with one thing for our family, and that's keeping everybody involved. No-till drills, kids on tractors probably before they should be, and then smiling faces. But yeah, see, that's that same day. Man, my kids will, when they see this, they're going to be like, Dad, I don't look like that. So ultimately, I did fairly well. I did 23, I wanted 21. I'll go back to the very first slide in case somebody needs contact information, but I'd be glad to take your questions at this time with Joe's help to mediate.
Any questions over there?
That's really exciting. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the tree species and some of the other income sources besides obviously lumber or timber down the road?
Understood. So like I said, we planted black walnuts. My kids had hoped to gather black walnuts to be able to sell at a farmer's market, etc. So our initial species was 50% black walnuts as our hardwood. We did honey locust, persimmon, yellow poplar for their fast, straight growth, and the black locust was our initial planting. The second time we planted, we came through and we tried, in addition to those, we also added in pecans. Pecans are, as I found, another slow-growing tree similar to the black walnuts. So the trainer trees, the first time we used all pitch lob, So a half pitch, half loblolly to get those nice quick growths in my area. It's not cold enough to need pitch, and it's not hot enough to support loblolly, and those worked out really well. We tried also white pine, Norway spruce, and shortleaf pine, but like I said, that implementation, for whatever reason, I truly believe it was the drought that happened like right after we planted. Secondary income sources, the black locust, firewood, as well as fence posts, and then you know, some of those fruits, or the secondary, the persimmons, the black walnuts, and then the honey locust is a secondary feed source, is kind of the idea of J. Russell Smith's book.
Is that video up online anyplace?
I don't even know if I was allowed to show that video, but I am sure that it will be out there somewhere. And I believe it is one of at least 3 or 4 that they did of multiple silvopasture implementations. A lot of the ones in Virginia have been going from forest thin to silvopasture, or pine plantation rowing silvopasture. But if you get me your info, as soon as I talk to Priya, I'll find out where it is and get that information out, or maybe work with JB and see if Nat GLC will, you know, link to it.
I have one over here.
So persimmon trees, the only named species I used were the Dunstan chestnuts I talked about. Otherwise, I worked with my contractor and said I wanted persimmon. So being a forester, I'm sure he went on the open market, found the cheapest persimmon trees he could. So I don't know if they're Asian or Virginia, but most of the fruits look as though they're a Virginia species.
Persimmon, honey locust, I have a lot of those naturally, and I find a lot of them showing up in the pasture where I don't want them. You have an issue with that as well?
That is certainly, we put in thornless honey locusts, you know, great, right? I hate to tell you, somehow they breed thorns. So we have the same problem. I now utilize that walk-behind mower you saw in the video, trying to catch them early, and then my skid steer with a bush hog on the front has foam-filled tires. So it is absolutely, when I spoke with a researcher over at UVA trying to get his specific thornless, he would not even sell to me because he knew I was going to put it in pasture, and he knew about those threats to modern agriculture.
Anyone else?
What about the idea of apple trees or peach trees or pear or anything like that?
So, okay, when we put in our CREP, we were allowed to put in 10% of non-hardwoods, and we tried pears, apples, and crab apples. Unfortunately, when you ask a contractor to put in pears, what do you get? You get Bartlett pears. I have Bartlett pears everywhere. So the kids now can recognize them, and it is like a game because I pay them $0.25 for every one they cut down. And they walk out there with their saws, and I mean, we're getting better at it, but in our second implementation, I don't think the video or anything showed, but I've got a telephone line down one side of my property that I was really concerned to not upset my right-of-way owner. And so I did put apple trees and crab apples as the first 2 rows right under there, so that the tall tree is now the third one in, about 30 feet off the line. And they've been successful, but common apple, I mean, I'm not even in my 10-year-old CREP, I'm not seeing the benefit of that 2-story agriculture. Now, if you use named apples, I'm sure that it would work. I truly believe, and I've got a friend who has a family orchard, and I believe with the right electric fencing, you could manage an orchard with their rows and their widths and mobile water to use it as a silvopasture. I don't know any orchard owner that is willing to be that renegade because that's their livelihood. But I've even asked at the end of the season, after all the apples come off, to be allowed to, even in one old row orchard that they plan to take down, to prove the concept post. But he and I need to have a couple more beers to figure that one out. Okay, so.
Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I really appreciate this
Thank you.
opportunity.